All right. So we have Tribal Gaze. Interesting, like first of all, just interesting name for a death metal band. Like eh, so wh- what does that word, what does that combination of words mean to you, if anything at all? Like there's a couple of ways you could approach that, and all of them I don't really understand what you're getting at. Like there's like tribal gaze, which is I've heard that term before, I'm sure. Would probably in more of like a joke form, or tribal gaze as in the like a very literal. Anyway, what exactly does that mean? I don't know. Um, but they've got a cool logo in their death metal band out of Longview, Texas. I think they're split between like Longview and the Dallas area, or whatever it is. They're from Texas. It's a big place. You drive a couple hours to get anywhere. They're from there. They're a death metal band. They definitely have a hardcore lean to their style, and that's pretty normal for both death metal and thrash metal out of Texas for the last 10 years. So we'll get more into that, but The Nine Choirs is their debut album. These guys have been around for 2 years, so a little quick was the trigger on the full length album. Nothing wrong with that, but this is a style that is very popular right now. It's getting a lot of like big label deals, and labels like E1 or MNRK Heavy, or uh, anything from Century Media and elsewhere are picking up on these bands because they have big production sounds, which so we can, like, if we pull all the way back to like the success of Iron Age as a sort of influence upon the general sort of heavy music coming out of Texas, we push all the way up to Power Trip, and from there everything from Mammoth Grinder to various smaller death metal projects have taken on a sort of look. Quite honestly, it sounds like metallic hardcore from the late '90s, when a lot of those bands like this, they put in their dues since the early '90s, and they were getting signed to like Century Media and Roadrunner because they were taking on a death metal production value. They were crossing over. The metallic hardcore like Earth Crisis and All Out War. Victory Records was quite big at the time. Those were crossing over into the interests of death metal. So that's all the context you need. If you don't understand what I'm talking about when I say this is a death metal slash hardcore record, if this is just what death metal sounds like to you, good for you. Because nowadays it is what passes for death metal. I'm not making a judgment on that, but these song structures, they have a lot more to do with brutal death metal. They have a lot to do with a little bit of old school death metal touches in there. Not really. This is not the generational pass, the baton passed between late '80s thrash and death metal. This is a lot of influences from both metalcore, hardcore, even a little bit of deathcore, uh, all adding up to what is basically a slow, very riff oriented form of death metal, which is very modern, but also very single-minded. It's directed, and they're funneling down one. They do one thing, they do it well, and they do that one thing over and over and over on this album for 36 minutes. Now, um, so what makes what makes the Nine Choirs interesting, easy to recommend, and enjoyable is its loud guitar sound. It's very effective, knotty, sort of like as in knotted, as in tied up, and moderately complex rhythm guitar work. This whole thing hinges on the success of the rhythm guitarist to create interesting rhythms. He does so most of the time, but it's all very much a one trick pony. And I don't mean that in such a negative way, because that is the way a lot of this is where we tie it back in, a lot of the '90s, late '90s hardcore kind of falls into place in the same way. Um, The rhythms are getting more complex. There are more guitar solos being attempted. There are themes, however light. There are a couple of samples in here. There's It's one of those records where they've done everything they can to dress up the fact that when you sit back and you listen to it over and over and over, it doesn't hold up beyond the rhythm guitarist performance in tandem with the drummer, I would say. As far as what they're saying, why they're saying it, all that, I sort of get it. Um, they're sort of approaching an irreligious point of point of view by pointing out what is destructive about human beings in a roundabout way. Really, what they're saying is that uh, what do they call it? It's sort of an alien existential crisis where human beings really can't live up to the high expectations of the higher powers they imagine. So I don't think they're really. Maybe there is like a deeper intellectual thought there, but um, the Nine Choirs definitely deals with the sort of expectation of heaven, and I think they started with this whole like hierarchy of angels being a little bit. It's like a corporate structure, so it's an interesting thought to start. I don't know if it makes for. It doesn't make a lot of sense just looking at it, but it is a striking image to start out. Again, the logo's pretty cool. I don't, it's very much the sort of modern sense of death metal where things don't totally make sense, but they all go together pretty well. And here's the catch, and I get to it here in the around the later category here is that like the introduction is really strong. We learn the language of the album by the second song, and then they just kind of iterate. And uh, it's not a dynamic running order. We don't go through an experience. They cut out these songs in the same way, and they just cut right through them. Uh, you know, I think a lot of people will really enjoy the guitar work. I think they'll probably want to play some of these riffs on the guitar and have fun with it, but I don't think they'll remember this album 2 weeks after they listen to it. Now, I've been listening to it for about 2 weeks, maybe two and a half, and after the sixth day of listening to it, I got it, and I was sure that I got it, and I went back to it again and again and again, picking it up for the 36-minute run, and I was like, I already got it. I get it, and it just wouldn't last on my shelf. So that's how I base my recommendations. So a lot of people feel like a 75 is pretty low. Really, it's just above average. This is an above average death metal album in a modern style. It's just okay. You know, I think that if you are less jaded about the cool things that people can do with this guitar tone, you might have missed out on the 90s. And I don't mean that in a reductive way. I think it's really cool. But this is really cool, too. It's just that it's not going to stick around for me, and I don't think it's more than just sort of like a keeping up with the latest death metal, getting the new ideas. There's a lot of music like this out there. This is a pretty fine example of it that doesn't have any long-term redeeming musical value. That's kind of where I'm at with it. I think they could be a lot more ambitious with everything in terms of songcraft, treating them like songs and uh, finding a way to write a song and a structure of a song that isn't just riff salad. So I like riff salad. I listen to a ton of death metal, and that's definitely my thing. But the way it all functions as a machine could use a lot of work in terms of more variety. And I know they pushed on this one, and it's a good record, but it definitely needs more to it, just more to it. And that's kind of where I landed with it. Is that that's cool. It's cool. So check it out, see if it's your thing. I think definitely push past that first impression because it's going to be cool, but is it going to stick with you? And that was my overall consideration: is it going to stick? And ultimately, no.